Welcome into the WFUV studios. I'm Kris Pursiainen here alongside Andrew Gullotta. You just finished up hearing from the fantastic talent on this women's basketball roster. Now, welcome to what is the final of 4 parts of this end-of-year WBB spectacular, I'll call it, in advance of this A10 tournament and all of the potential challenges that these Fordham Rams might get to face.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously A10 tournament, the most fun time of the year. When you look at just one weekend, it all comes down to this, all the hard work, all the big games, and with this team, the heroics, the final shots, which we've seen over the course of this season, it all comes down to really 3 games or possibly 3 games for the Rams if they can keep winning. And that's, I think, what makes March Madness the most fun, college basketball the most fun.
Absolutely. I wanted to start off with a quick just reminder of kind of who this Fordham team is. 18-11 on the season, finished 10-6 in conference, 2-game winning streak to end the year. Getting hot at the right time is what good teams do.
Yeah.
Andrew, I've got to ask you, if you were explaining, scouting, biographizing this Fordham women's basketball team to a third party that hadn't watched them before, what kind of characteristics do you think that this team has, especially at an A10 tournament level?
I think the first thing that you have to look at this team, and especially I think it's extremely pertinent when you kind of look at it in a lens of you have to win 3 games in 3 days, is the veteran nature of this team. I mean, they have all the experience in the world, and you could just go right down the list. Asia Dingle, grad student; Anna DeWolf, senior; Caitlin Downey, grad student; Jada DePog, grad student; Sarah Carpel, senior. You go right down the list. Everyone that's in this rotation has a ton of experience at these types of tournaments. They've all played in at least 4 of them, or at least the main starters have. And then when you look at, the veteran nature of the team, pair that with a ton of talent up front. Asia Dingle, A10 Defensive Player of the Year, just came out, co-A10 Defensive Player of the Year, I should say. Leading scorer in the A10 as well. Anna DeWolf, 18.4 points a game. Hit that crazy last-second shot against Rhodey, last week. You kind of just go down the line, but they're led with those 2 at the top, Caitlin Downey as well. And if this team's going to win the A10 tournament, they're going to do it because of their stars. And I think that this team, they're going to win by their stars. They also could lose if they don't obviously have that output that kind of we've seen at times. They're a team that could beat anybody, but to me also could lose to anybody.
For sure. I think when you take a look at this Fordham team, the word that pops up in the front of my mind is fight.
Yeah.
And it's, I can get as corny as possible here on the air and talk about it's not about how many times you fall down. It's about how many. But this Fordham team keeps getting up. They keep picking themselves back up, tying those shoelaces, and continuing on their path. And I think it's really admirable that despite the great adversity they faced throughout the years as a team, and even the adversity this year a team,
a ton.
In 1 week, they lost 2 staples to injuries, in their locker room.
Go back to July, even. I mean, you have a coaching change really late in the season,
Yep.
and I think, head coach Candace Green, she talked about it, just having all of the seniors kind of stick with the program. That's hard. I mean, not a lot of teams have a coaching change, at basically the beginning of, I guess it would be fall camp or whatever you want to kind of call that beginning of the season. So everyone was just getting back, and then you have, a huge kind of rumble to this program, and they stood together. They got a double bye, which they didn't last year. I mean, you could talk about kind of the quality of the conference as well, but testament to them and the adversity that they've faced and the perseverance that they've been able to go through.
And, you speak about the rest of the conference. I think this A10 is actually really good. I think there are teams in the 6, 8, 10 spots that I could see.
I mean, last year, very good. Fordham was a 6 seed, and it's basically the same team. That's coming back this year.
I can, see the reality where a Mason, a LaSalle, a Joe's wins the whole thing. And I think that is what is awesome about this upcoming A10 tournament is the parity that we have to see in it. And the reason I say that is because I think when you look, and we can go sport to sport quickly, like my favorite playoffs is NHL. And it's because there's so much parity. Any team can win. And it feels like coming into this A10 tournament, any one of these fantastic teams has a real shot to win. So I wanted to talk about, was there a moment this season, was there a game this season, maybe even in conference against some
Yeah.
of these teams that kind of said to you, this team can stick it out. Because for me personally, I know the popular pick would be
The Rhode Island
probably
game.
what you'll go with, that
Yeah.
Rhode Island game. But to me, the 2 games against UMass, where they lost both, taught me a lot about this team in a good and bad way, in the sense that I think it's all good. Like learning is good.
Yeah.
Like I think they found out a lot about themselves, as well as found out a lot they didn't know they could do. I think when they came out in that first game after losing Meg to injury and having Jada step into that starting lineup, and they kept that fight going as a unit, I think that was a really powerful statement. And I know they lost that game, but it was a testament to this group's ability to stick together and on the same page. You take a look at the second UMass game, 2-point loss, everything good up until the end when Fordham couldn't get a shot off on that final possession. It felt like they learned a lot about what kind of fighter they were as a team, and also some crunch time offensive struggles they needed to iron out before reaching the tournament. What about you?
I mean, it's interesting. So I'm going to go to a couple of games. I think the Rhodey game, I think, you'd be remiss not to talk about that game, just the back and forth nature, because you have the 10-point lead going into the fourth quarter. Then, you kind of go down. I don't know how much, you were calling the game. I don't know how much they ended up going down by towards the end. Then they ended up going to overtime and winning that game. That, to me, gives you the confidence to leap into this tournament, because if they lose that game, you talk about trying to get hot going into the tournament. That's 4 straight losses, and it's a completely different conversation we're having. So that probably is the turning point of their season, even though it was so late. I think you could also talk about the St. Joe's game that they played at St. Joe's. That was kind of their first win. It was right after that UMass game, the first UMass game. And to me, that was important just to get a win against a really quality team in conference. They really didn't do it up to that point. And then you could go to the flip side about some games that maybe, they should have won and didn't win. You could talk about the George Mason game on senior day. That, I think, kind of sticks out to me. The St. Louis game, another one. You can kind of go down some of the tough losses that they've had too. George Washington, who ends up having a really good year, but at the time it seemed like a pretty tough loss. But, overall, this team has a ton of talent. To me, the biggest thing going into this tournament is, can they finish off games? Because we've seen it, them get out to leads, and then the other team creeps back in, and they end up losing or maybe winning. We've seen it both ways. But if this team is going to win 3 games in three days, which is just so difficult, they're going to have to finish off teams. I think they could, and they definitely have the talent to. And we kind of saw it in that Rhodey game, but I think you have to see that continue.
Yeah, I think the A10 women's basketball conference play, now, different leagues have different, for lack of a better word, vibes to them.
Yeah.
And I think A10 has this component to it that's very physical, very grit and grind, very, rebounds matter more in the A10 than they do in your average basketball game. And I think that's why when you have someone like Jada DePauw averaging 3 offensive rebounds a game now, when you have someone like Caitlin Downey, who's 9th in the A10 in rebounds per game to end the year, I think that puts you in a good spot. You've got a tough physical team heading into the tournament, but like we were saying, some tough opponents. And in these quarterfinals, take a look at the schedule right now, and you're going to see, either number 5 Richmond or the winner of 12 Dayton, 13 VCU. And, VCU is a team that played Fordham close this year. Dayton is a team that played Fordham close this year.
Yeah.
And Richmond, the 5 seed, obviously a tough opponent. Who do you think Fordham plays in this first round? Obviously, Dayton and VCU competing for the right to play Richmond, to compete for the right to play Fordham. But that's the advantage of earning a double bye in that regular season. Who do you see Fordham playing?
I think they'll play Richmond, and I think it's a good matchup for them. I think they got a good draw. Now, you could talk about kind of after the Richmond game, which I think you kind of really can't because that's obviously looking way too ahead, but you see UMass obviously kind of directly in their path, so that would be a really interesting semifinal matchup for sure, kind of that, the third battle between those two teams. But I think Richmond's a team that Fordham handled pretty well earlier in this season. They had trouble last year against Richmond, which was kind of interesting, but this year they handled them really well, a 9-point win, trying to do some quick math. So they were able to handle them better than a team like VCU, which is kind of interesting, who, Fordham barely got the win against them. I believe that VCU, they had the final shot go in, but it was just after the buzzer. So, that game could have went completely different and kind of changed the course of the season. Dayton, a team that kind of has a ton of history, around them. They're a team that, just went to the tournament last year. Obviously, this year, completely different team. just trying to rebuild, but they've gotten better throughout the season as well. But I think they'll play Richmond, and I think that's a good matchup for them.
Yeah, I think the 5-seeded Richmond is a good projection point as well. They went 8-6 in conference. When you take a look at teams like Dayton and VCU, they weren't as successful in conference. Dayton 5-10, VCU 4-12.
Yeah.
And so, Fordham, again, like we said earlier, decent record in conference to end the year. Great momentum heading into this tournament. I also project them to get Richmond in this first round, and I do think this is a nice first test for these Rams.
Yes.
Because like I said earlier, the level of play at these tournaments, the style of play at these tournaments, I think makes Richmond a tough opponent. And they've got some size down low. They've got a solid coached team, and I think that this is going to be not a full litmus test. It is a real challenge, but it will be fascinating to see how this Rams team responds. Now, like you said, it's tough to look ahead, but if we were to take a peek around the bend down the potential road to the A10 finals, you're looking at teams like the number 1 UMass, unless you play 8 LaSalle or 9 George Mason, and then your finals likely 2 Rhode Island, 3 St. Louis, or 6 St. Joe's to make a run if you like them. Out of these teams, LaSalle, Mason, St. Louis, and St. Joseph's, kind of leaving Rhode Island and UMass.
Okay, so you're talking about everyone besides the two.
Out of the pack in the middle that is really kind of, I think, elevated the whole level of conference play this season. I feel like the A10 conference games I've watched were better basketball than I've seen in my time here at Fordham.
Last year was a really good last year you had 2 teams in the tournament. You won't see that this year. So the top was so good.
The top was great. I think this year teams and stories like George Washington having the 6th woman of the year be a freshman. I think they've got a lot of nice fresh talent.
I like GW a lot.
Yeah, they're fun and scrappy.
And they beat Fordham in a way that ends up being a 6-point game. But for most of that game, it was double digits. Fordham ended up coming back late, which I think we've seen kind of a few times throughout where they're kind of down, but they make that last second push. But they have a lot of size down low. They have some really impressive freshmen, as Nia Robertson obviously kind of leading the way, but they have a lot of impressive scorers as well. And they're a team that started their rebuild last year, and now going into this season, they've been able to kind of go on top of that rebuild and kind of take that next step as a team.
Yeah, no, the A10 is full as a conference now of like directed teams. These teams have direction. They are heading somewhere. I think that's nice to see. So you look at that pack of 8 and 9 seeded LaSalle and George Mason, and the 6 seeded St. Joe's, the 3rd seeded St. Louis Billikens. Who do you think poses the greatest challenge to Fordham? Is it a roster thing?
I think it's St. Louis, I think. I mean, they're the 3 seed. Fordham lost to them. And another game that I think Fordham was a bit surprised. I mean, they gave up a ton of points in that game. I mean, I forgot the exact amount. I think
87 to 84, your final.
So 87 points. It's going to be tough to win games if you're, putting up 87 points. Brooke Flowers, the block leader, I think, in the country. So she's a player that will definitely kind of disrupt things down low.
There's your
for
other
the Rams.
co-defensive player of the year.
Yes, exactly. So, she'll obviously be, a difficult player for Fordham if they obviously or really the whole A10, whoever goes up against St. Louis. George Mason, we saw how tough they were just a few weeks ago at the Rose Hill Gym on Senior Day. That, I think, will be, a tougher game as well. I'm not as worried about St. Joe's. They kind of play similar to Fordham, and I think Fordham just has a better roster. So I think Fordham, kind of has the upper edge there. And, LaSalle, I think, they're a team that Fordham handled. I wouldn't be surprised if they were able to do that again. But, again, I feel like it's just looking ahead to, UMass is going to be there. And, I think that they're far and above the best team right now. I think even above Rhodey. And if they're going to win the A10, you have to beat UMass, and you're probably going to have to beat Rhodey. If not, you're going to have to beat a team like St. Louis that, has beaten Fordham. So this is going to be a tough road, but this team has a ton of talent for Fordham, and, you obviously have that championship caliber pedigree. You just have to go out and show it for 3 days straight, which is extremely difficult.
It's so demanding. You talked about Brooke Flowers, just one block for her in that high-scoring matchup. So you think of all the shots going up. She was only able to get her fingers on one. I think that's a testament to Fordham's game plan, not allowing her to kind of get that takeover essence of the game. But to me, and I know you said that Fordham has handled them earlier in the year, but out of that pack, most challenging opponent would be number 8, LaSalle.
You think?
I think I know they have the guard with the number 1 assist to turnover ratio in the country. Not the A10, not the Northeast, not the East Coast, the whole thing. And when you take a look at how tournament A10 ball goes, the possessions are slower and they are fewer. The court is smaller, it has shrunk, and it feels as if every play, not molasses, but just like everything's happening at a .95 speed. It feels like the game is slowed down just a tad. And Molly Massantonio, with last I checked, her about 4.5 assist to turnover ratio, which is hilarious, is built for that kind of environment. Now, I do think LaSalle's worry will be the shooting. The 3 Jacobs sisters, not prolific shooters from downtown, but they are great at everything else. However, neutral site environment, LaSalle gets hot, and all of a sudden they're looking like a top 3 team in the A10. So I do like this LaSalle team. I think they're very well coached by McGilvery, and I do think that they do pose a threat if they can get hot. They almost remind me of just a team. I want to throw out like a WNBA team that's so streaky because of shooting, but I can't put that down on anyone else. I think that they have a lot of their outcome determined by their shooting percentage from 3.
Yeah.
And that's, very high volatility. That's a product of the modern era of basketball. If they can get hot
do you think they're really
right
getting by UMass? Like, I mean, at the end of the day, and I think it's my fault. I said that Fordham handled them. They didn't. They lost by 12. That was my fault. I was looking at the wrong game on the schedule. But I think that no team is getting by UMass. I think UMass is clearly kind of the class. And Fordham would be lucky, I think, to play a team like LaSalle or, a team like George Mason. I think that you got to go into this thinking you're going to have to beat the best. Now, I think there are a lot of good teams in the A10, but UMass is a team that has received votes in both polls throughout the year. Now they're only receiving in one because one of the losses last week. But they're a team that, is the class of this A10, made the NCAA tournament last year. They did win the A10 tournament as a 3 seed. So maybe that's something to kind of look at, that they weren't the number 1 seed last year and still won the tournament. But this team is very, very good. I think you can kind of go down the list. I have the A10 player of the year in Sam Breen. But they're also just a really deep team. Fordham hasn't obviously beat them this season, and I think that's the matchup in this tournament that everyone will be looking forward to if the matchup obviously happens there on that semifinal.
Yeah, and Breen player of the year, easy to highlight her, but me personally, when you watch those Minute Women, Angelique Galakalandi, Bernaya Mayo, the impact that these other starters have is off the charts, and it's because they are stars in their role. They know what they have to do on that team. I think Breen is the same way. She does not play like your prototypical A10 star player. She plays like the biggest cog in the engine of several, and that's a hard role to fill, but also one that's very conducive to the whole team looking great. And, that's a credit to Breen, but it's also a credit to the talent of these other Minute Women like Mayo, like Falaxi, like Galakalani, these players that can really,
they have a
really play.
Very deep team. It's not just one player.
And so that's why when Fordham goes up against them in the regular season, you get these great games out of it because you've got the experience versus the experience and the talent versus the talent and the experience. It's a fantastic matchup between these two teams. I think it's interesting that it comes in an earlier round than the finals. It kind of feels like watching the A10 this year, that this could have been a possible finals matchup, especially with how the 2 regular season ones went. A little bit of juice to those showdowns. But it'll be interesting to see Fordham get an earlier chance to play them. Maybe not as big of an environment as in the finals, and it's easier for an underdog to sneak in a win than in a big stage game. But like you said, it's going to be a big challenge, and if they are able to get past that challenge of Massachusetts, well, they get the opportunity to play, like we said, a Rhode Island, a St. Joe's. So those teams are also great. I think just the state of the A10 right now is very
But I think if they beat
optimistic.
UMass, I think the momentum could carry you through. I think
Absolutely.
This team has been knocking at the door on UMass for a few years now, and they haven't been able to seal the deal. They've gotten out to leads, big leads, like a few of last year's games, but this season also be, you're basically within a stone's throw of them winning either game. So I just feel like, this game I think will be the most important. I think everybody has it kind of circled on their schedule. You cannot obviously look over a team like Richmond or whoever they're going to play in the first round, because that's your most important game for sure. But this UMass game, I think everybody in the A10, will definitely be looking at it. And, this team, it's kind of the boogeyman for Fordham has been UMass. They haven't been able to win that big coveted game. And, I think that's going to, if they can get it done this year, especially with this kind of year being the final year of the Fordham core, I think that, it's really an exclamation point on a lot of these players' careers.
I would see it as a period, just the end of a statement career for a lot of these Fordham players. Not an exclamation, not a, hey, look at this, just admire. So, I'm like I said, a little corny when it comes to that stuff, but along that same vein, the last dance for this team, Downey, DePauw, Dingle, DeWolf, Carpel, Green, you've got a great starting five and coach for this A10 tournament. They've got great chemistry. They've got great talent on the court, so it's going to be very exciting to see how these Fordham Rams approach this tournament and especially watch these games, Andrew. So thanks for joining me here in the studios to discuss the outlook for Fordham.
Yeah, for sure. Good luck on the trip. I hope everything goes well. Hope you're there all weekend for sure, and this team could get it done. But I think the biggest thing, kind of my last thought, is this team finishing in the fourth quarter. I think when you look back at a lot of these players' careers, finishing in those big moments, and if they can do that, this team is very, very dangerous.
It felt like the Wolves' shot against Rhode Island may have just been
crack the seal a bit.
She and the team needed to see to open those floodgates. Well, that'll wrap it for us and this special. Thanks for tuning in. For Andrew Gullotta, I'm Kris Pursiainen.